Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is, what if Naruto was adopted by Tsunade after Kushina abandoned him? Part 1. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Kushina woke up feeling exhausted like she hadn't ever felt before and her eyes fluttered open. She groggily looked around to see the white ceiling of the hospital and sat up feeling pain course throughout her body with every movement she made. Then the memories of the night came rushing back to her as she remembered all that she had lost last night. She remembered how her husband sacrificed himself to seal that demon and save the village. She felt a pang of hurt as she remembered how he had split the yin and yang halves of the chakra and sealed them into Mito and Narumi while the soul of the demon into her son Naruto. She reached onto the side of the bed and let her feet touch the cold icy tiles of the hospital floor and got up with a great amount of effort. Suddenly the door clicked open and in walked Jiraiya, Tsunade, Hiruzen and Kakashi. They all looked stunned that Kushina was up and already standing. Tsunade rushed to her side and helped her as she stumbled a few steps and helped her stand straight. Kushina, even if you are an Uzumaki, having a biju ripped apart from your body has taken its toll on you. You should rest and let your body recover from the strain. She scolded, but Kushina paid it no mind. Tsunade brought her back to the bed and helped her sit gently as she started going through her medical charts. Well, Kushina, you should be fine after a week's worth of rest. But there has been a lot of damage to your chakra coils that will take some time to recover. You will have to spend a couple of years in rehabilitation to let your chakra coils recover before you could use the shinobi arts again. She said, and Kushina nodded and gave her a small smile as Tsunade smiled back. Alright, you people talk, I have to go and check on some other surgeries that are going on. She said and left as Hiruzen gave her a grateful nod for returning back to the village in its time of need. He knew it was only temporary, but the village needed her medical skills and he was glad she was there. She had saved any lives already treating the patents that had been given up by the medial staff and he couldn't be prouder of his student. He walked up to Kushina's bed as he saw she was lost in thought and put a hand over her shoulder as she looked at him, surprised that she had spaced out, and smiled a little smile back, and he saw that she was hiding the pain that was in her heart. Hiruzen, where are my children? Please bring them to me. She said in a pleading voice, and he nodded as the three men walked up to the cribs and took a hold of each of the peacefully sleeping child in their arms. Hiruzen and Jiraiya laid the twin red-headed girls in her arms as she looked at them, smiling that they had completely inherited her Uzumaki traits as they gazed at her sleepily with their violet eyes and went back to sleep. The three men smiled at seeing their interaction, and Kakashi stepped forward to hand over her third child as he put his hands forward. Kushina saw the blonde bundle in his arms and her eyes widened as she laid her first gaze on him and immediately saw those three faint whisker marks on each of his cheek and remembered what he held. Flashbacks of the previous night came rushing back to her as she saw the visions of the Kyuubi piercing Minato's abdomen with his claw as he tried to save Naruto and finally sealed the soul into him, and her hands slapped Kakashi's hand away. Kakashi was startled as his hand was slapped and saw Naruto felt the movement and was about to get up when he started rocking the little child, and he went back to deep slumber snuggling in his arms, and he smiled under his mask seeing how much he looked like his beloved sensei. Hiruzen and Jiraiya too saw the interaction and were surprised at Kushina's actions. Hiruzen decided to voice his confusion as he felt dread form in the pit of his stomach. Kushina, what's wrong? Don't you want to hold your son? He asked gently, and she stared at him with icy eyes that startled him a bit. That thing is not my son anymore, she said in an icy cold tone, and all three were wide-eyed at what she said. Kushina, what do you mean? Naruto is your son, hissed Jiraiya in a low voice, not wanting to startle the sleeping kids, and she glared at him. No, my son died the moment Minato sealed the soul of the Kyuubi into him. He is possessed by the demon that killed my husband and almost destroyed the village completely. Look at those whiskers on his cheek, those are proof enough of the possession. He is the reason my husband died and left me alone, she hissed, glaring at the blonde bundle in Kakashi's arms as he held him protectively in his arms and backed up a couple of steps away from the bed. Hiruzen was stunned at the confession she made and the pure hatred she glared at the little blonde bundle with. Kushina, you can't be serious, that is your son. Just look at the resemblance he bears with Minato. He has inherited those strong Namikaze genes of your husband. Don't be blinded by your hatred. He spoke gently, trying to get the point across. Yes, Kushina, you were a Jinchuriki yourself, you should know better than to talk about it like that, said Jiraiya in a calm tone, trying to keep his temper in check while Kushina's face darkened as she glared at them. That thing killed my husband and took possession over my son's body, and those marks on his face are proof enough. Minato must have slipped up the ceiling in his last moments, and the demon took advantage of it. Just finish that thing off and be done with it. It has caused so much damage to this village and my family already, she said in a cold tone, and all three were wide-eyed at her words and their eyes turned cold as they glared at her. I expected better from you, Kushina, said Hiruzen as Jiraiya and Kakashi too followed him without saying a word. They walked out of the room and sat down on the bench in the hallway, all of them in deep thought. Tsunade was walking down the hallways as she saw the three sitting there with thoughtful expressions on their faces and saw the little blonde bundle in Kakashi's arms as he stirred awake and was getting a bit uncomfortable. Kakashi tried to calm him down, but he kept struggling. All the three men tried everything they could, but the boy wasn't calming down as they saw his troubled expression. He wasn't crying, but they knew he was uncomfortable and nearly whimpering, but didn't know why or what to do for him. Tsunade saw the pathetic attempt of the three men calming him down, and they were all startled as Tsunade walked up to them and took him in her arms as she wrapped him up in a warm embrace. He instantly calmed down and smiled as she rubbed his back gently and held him by his waist as she gazed at him with a loving expression. Naruto just kept staring at her with wide blue curious eyes, and she smiled at him lovingly as she kissed him softly on the lips, and he giggled happily as she rocked and cooed him, making him giggle all the more. Aren't you adorable, my little angel? Oohhh. She cooed, and he gazed at her curiously and rubbed her cheek softly with a bright smile as she held him closer to her. All the three were dumbfounded as Tsunade played with the little child that they were trying so hard to calm down, and smiled a moment later, seeing her lost in her own little world. She cradled him in her arms and watched as he was smiling and giggling as she rubbed his whiskers that made him look all the more adorable in her eyes. She brought him closer to her chest as he yawned cutely and snuggled into her embrace and just went back into his deep slumber again. She smiled at his peaceful sleeping face and gazed at the three smiling men and looked on curiously. Why is it that you three idiots are taking care of him instead of Kushina? She asked, and all of them looked down ashamed, confusing her greatly. Well, you see, Tsunade, Kushina has kind of abandoned Naruto, thinking that he is possessed by the Kyuubi, said Hiruzen nervously as the temperature of the hallways dropped a couple of degrees. What? She asked in a low voice, and all of them began to sweat as Kakashi spoke up. Well, you see, Tsunade-sama, she believes him to be the Kyuubi and that his soul has taken over his body. She even went as far as to call for the boy's death, explained Kakashi nervously, and Hiruzen sighed. Yes, well, she isn't the only one. The whole council and the villagers are forcing me to either execute him or just throw him out of the village and be done with it. With Kushina abandoning him, he has nowhere to go. The orphanage isn't safe, and with the truth of his heritage and the burden he holds within him, the villagers as well as his father's enemies will stop at nothing to kill the boy, he said sadly, and all of them looked down as Kakashi spoke up. Jiraiya-sama, why don't you adopt the boy? He will be safe with you, said Kakashi, and Jiraiya grew nervous as he looked around trying to think of an excuse. Well, Kakashi, I have to run the spy network for the village, and I can't have the fear of a helpless child with me if someone tries to attack me for something. And I really am not a great father material kind of a guy, you know, he said, laughing nervously, and Hiruzen sighed. I would have adopted him, but the council will raise hell over it, and with Bawako's death and me retaking the Hokage position, I cannot take care of him. There just isn't the time that a small child like him needs if he is with me, he said somberly, and both turned to Kakashi. Well, I have Anbu duties, and I really don't have any experience with children, nor am I mature enough to raise him. Plus, he reminds me too much of Sensei. It hurts to just see him and be reminded of the loss that I have endured, he said as all three of them looked down on the ground thinking of what to do as Tsunade had enough of their rambling. Pathetic, she whispered, and they all looked at her questionably. To think that you would all make such excuses and leave a little child of a person who gave up his life for this pathetic excuse of a village. How far has this village fallen? To think that a mother abandons her own son, his father's friends abandon his son as a worthless child, and the village he died protecting is calling for the murder of his child. This isn't the village that my grandfather and granduncle envisioned and died for. It was their dream that no child should ever suffer the childhood that they faced in their era, and thus the village hidden in the leaves was found, but I guess they failed. She said icily, and all of them averted their eyes ashamed as the truth was slammed into their faces. Don't worry about the child. If none of you cowards are willing to take responsibility for him, I'll adopt him as my own son. She said calmly, and all of their eyes widened as Hiruzen smiled hopefully. So you are going to stay in the village now, Tsunade? He asked hopefully, and she scoffed as they all looked on confused. I've seen the real face of this village tonight and it disgusts me to no end. No, I will be retiring from the shinobi forces completely and go out of the village to raise Naru-chan there as my own son. He will be safer there than here with all the wolves hunting him in the village. She said, and Hiruzen was wide-eyed. You can't be serious, Tsunade. The village needs you now more than ever, and Naruto belongs here where his father wanted him to be raised. He said desperately, and she glared at him icily as he flinched from the stare. I came here just to treat the people of this village from the attack after I heard about the attack on the village and the magnitude of the destruction. I was going to retire anyways, but I guess destiny had a beautiful plan for me in mind. Kami gave me a beautiful son to raise and live for. She whispered softly, kissing Naruto, and Hiruzen smiled sadly knowing she was right and he had no way to make her stay. Plus, Naruto was really not safe in the village at the moment. The villagers were plotting of ways to get rid of him, and the council wanted him to keep the demon away from the hero twins Uzumaki, so that he won't get his power back and kill them. But Tsunade, what about the enemies that will be hunting him down for his father's enemies? You are safer here than outside the village, said Jiraiya, knowing the village needed the strength of a Sannin and her skills desperately at the moment, and she glared at his pathetic excuse for keeping her tied down. Please, I am one of the Sannin, Jiraiya, and my skills haven't gotten that rusty for now. Ever since I got rid of my hemophobia I have upped my skills again, and I don't think that anyone is stupid enough from Iwa or Kumo to take me on just for the sake of hurting a child and bring the wrath of Konoha on them. They are recovering from the last war themselves and won't do anything stupid for now. Nothing any of you say will make me stay in the village any longer, she said, and Jiraiya nodded hesitatingly knowing she was right. Kakashi just listened silently knowing Tsunade will be giving him the love of a mother that he so desperately needed. It was the best for him and he was happy for his sensei's legacy. Alright, Sarutobi-sensei, I'll send my retirement papers at your office tomorrow morning along with the adoption papers for Naru-chan. I'll leave tomorrow at noon after we have dealt with everything, she said, and he nodded hesitantly knowing there wasn't anything he could say to make her stay in the village. Alright then, I have healed all those that needed my immediate assistance and left the rest of the cures needed with the medical staff. If that is all, I will be retreating to the Senju compounds for the night. Me and Naru-chan need a bit of sleep, she said, getting up, and they watched her leave with ashamed faces knowing that the truths she spoke of their cowardice would sting them for quite some time. Senju compounds. Tsunade walked through the large Senju compounds to the house of the clan head and saw that this abandoned part of the village was mostly unscathed, with the barrier seals of her grandmother still holding up strong even after all these years. She walked through the gate of the house and on to the rock steps on the grounds of the huge garden towards the old royal two-story house that was still as elegant and beautiful as it was in its old days. She opened the door as the barrier didn't stop her, recognizing her blood and chakra signature, and she walked in towards the master bedroom and put down Naruto on the huge bed as she went into the bathroom to get changed into her sleepwear and came out in a white robe tied around her and her hair flowing freely as she sat on the bed and took up Naruto in her arms and sat down as she heard the door open and knew Shizune must have come home. Shizune slid open the door and dropped the small bag in her hand in shock as she saw Tsunade there holding a little child in her arms gazing at him lovingly. She wondered who the child was and his blonde hair just shocked her all the bit more. Tsunade-sama, who is that child? She asked in a stunned voice pointing at Naruto, and Tsunade saw Naruto's eyes open lightly from the voice as he yawned cutely and gazed at her with those wide blue curious eyes again. Shizune came beside her and sat down as she watched the adorable child that wasn't even paying attention to her and just staring at Tsunade curiously. Tsunade kissed his lips softly and he smiled and giggled happily as she cooed him, and suddenly Naruto tugged on her robe slightly. She thought that he must be hungry since the last food he was given at the hospital was 6 hours ago. She gently opened her robe as Naruto latched himself on her nipple and she held him close to her as she held a ram hand seal and Naruto started feeding himself happily. Shizune watched in disbelief as she saw her master feeding the little child on her own. But didn't understand how that was even possible for her to do. How? She stuttered out and Tsunade smiled at her little apprentice. This is a medical jutsu that I wanted to introduce to the nurses at the hospital for children who lost their mothers unexpectedly and needed to be fed. The council shot down the proposal seeing that it took a lot of training and time and they thought of it as a waste of time for potential combat medics during war. Well, I guess it does have its uses now. The user sends the medical chakra activating our mammary glands forcefully and stimulates them to create the milk for the child. I am the only one for now who can use it with the amount of control it needs or it could lead to cancer in any unexperienced females attempting it. She said as Shizune nodded with a smile and was amazed at the skill of her master as she watched the little blonde boy feed himself. She saw the glow of happiness on Tsunade's face and smiled at the two. She hadn't seen that smile on her face in so many years. This was what she needed the most, she mused. Who is he, Tsunade-sama? She asked and Tsunade changed the position for little Naruto as he latched onto her other nipple and gazed at Shizune with a smile. I have adopted him, Shizune, and his name is Naruto. Kushina has abandoned him. He is actually Minato's son and has the soul of the Kyuubi sealed into him. The whole village, his mother included, has abandoned him and is calling for his death. I'll take him away from this village and leave the village tomorrow. I will send my retirement papers tomorrow morning along with his adoption papers and we'll leave tomorrow at noon. She said and Shizune was wide-eyed that they would do such a thing and watched as Naruto stopped and Tsunade smiled as she tied her robe again. She undid her jutsu and watched as Naruto was staring at her curiously and then saw him looking at Shizune for the first time. Shizune gasped as she saw his wide beautiful cerulean eyes staring at her curiously and hesitantly took him in her arms as she saw him staring at her. She just resisted the urge to yell kawaii and glomp him to death at his adorable face. She watched as he gazed back at Tsunade and opened his arms to her urging her to hold him and she took him from her and cradled him in her arms as he snuggled into her embrace happily. Shizune was surprised that he had such an attachment to her in such a short amount of time. He really likes you, Tsunade-sama. She whispered as she saw Naruto feeling sleepy and going in and out of sleep and Tsunade nodded. Yes, after all he is my son. She spoke in a soft and happy voice making Shizune smile as she walked out of the room towards her own letting them have their rest. Tsunade lied down with her head on the pillow facing sideways as she gazed into the sleepy eyes of the little blonde beside her. Do you like me as your mother, Naru-chan? She whispered softly and he rubbed her cheek with his tiny hand and she kept her own on his and as she brought him close and he snuggled into the crook of her neck happily and she smiled. It was almost as if he understood her words, she mused. She closed her own eyes and went to sleep with a big smile after all those years. Good night, Naru-chan, she whispered as sleep claimed them both and they slept peacefully into the night. The next morning, Tsunade woke up with a yawn as she felt something snuggle into her neck and a small breath on her neck as she gazed down at the little blonde bundle cuddled up against her and smiled. She slowly sat up with him in her arms as he too yawned cutely and gazed at her with those curious cerulean orbs. She was transfixed by his eyes and his little smile and she was surprised that he hadn't cried once since last night when those three idiots were scaring her little cute baby. She saw him and fed him as he tugged on her robe again and she rubbed his back gently waiting for him to burp and then freshened up herself and little Naruto as she sat in the warm water of the bathtub with Naruto in her arms who was giggling and playing with the water. She played with him and laughed so happily after a long time and felt completely refreshed. She walked out of the bathroom as she walked over to the dresser and closet for some clothes. She opened it and saw her usual clothes but chose to discard the green jacket for today and wore a white full-sleeved battle kimono that gave her good access if she had to feed Naruto again. She picked up Naruto and put the diapers on him that Shizune had brought her a while ago and wrapped him up in a blue blanket with the Senju symbol on it as she walked out with her hair tied in a loose bun with a sanbon. She walked through the streets and towards the Hokage Tower as every villager turned and gazed at her curiously seeing the little blanket in her arms and whispering things about who the child was or was he her son since they gazed at his blonde hair and started gossiping. She paid the idiots no mind as she gazed down at little boy hidden from the villagers in the blanket and saw him playing with a lock of free hair of hers and smiled as she came up to the Hokage Tower. Hokage Tower. Hokage office. Hiruzen was going through his paperwork and was wondering if it would ever end. The stacks just kept piling up no matter how many he completed. He sighed as he heard a knock on the door and sighed in relief from the break he got. "Come in," he said, and the door opened as Tsunade walked in with a blue blanket in her arms, and he saw the familiar mop of sun-kissed blonde hair peeking out of it and smiled at his student. Maybe this would be good for the both of them, he mused. Tsunade walked up and placed a scroll on his desk with the official Senju clan seal on it, and he sighed. "Tsunade, you don't have to retire. You have a lot of years ahead of you and you already have Sanin travel rights. You can just go without the retirement." He tried to persuade her one last time and she just scoffed. "Please, Sarutobi-sensei, that means the village can recall me if there is ever trouble and force me to return. I don't want to return to this village until I want to and until Naru-chan is ready for it," she said, and he sighed as he took the scroll and unsealed it. It was worth a try, he mused as he stamped the scroll, handing it to her secretary, and knew the council would raise hell over it. He took out the papers for adoption and kept them in front of her as Tsunade took a seat and picked up the brush, signing it as Hiruzen took them back and stamped them with his official seal and handed them to his secretary too. "Sarutobi-sensei, this adoption is official, right? I mean, Kushina is still his real mother," she said uncertainly as Hiruzen cut her off with a wave. "I had the paperwork done with her last night after you left, and she has evicted Naruto from the Uzumaki clan and has cut all her ties with him. She requested for Minato's inheritance, and I am afraid that Minato has left most of his fortune for the girls since Kushina has evicted him from it and left just a little for Naruto. Minato believed Kushina would take care of him and left her the guardian of his fortune, but he has left the knowledge he had for Naruto, seeing he took after him," he said, handing her some scrolls with the Namikaze seals, and Tsunade took them with a smile. "Well, I don't care about the money anyways, the Senju fortune is already large enough. And I'm sure Naru-chan will appreciate these much more than money anyways," she said, and Hiruzen nodded with a smile. "I suggest you keep the name Naruto Senju for now and do not associate with the Namikaze name for the time being until the animosity dies down a bit, alright?" he said, and she nodded with a smile as she gazed down at the little child in her arms. "So how do you like your new name, Naru-chan? Naruto Senju has a nice ring to it, right?" she asked, cooing, and he giggled happily, making the adults smile, and Tsunade sat there playing with him. "So Tsunade, where will you go now?" asked Hiruzen, and Tsunade answered him while playing with Naruto, not looking at him. "There is an old Senju compound unused from the Warring States era. Grandpa used to take me there when I was a child, and it is quite a big house with lots of open spaces and the protection of my grandmother and granduncle's seals. So it should be the safest place for Naru-chan for now. There is a small village nearby for supplies and is unknown to almost everyone now," she said, and Hiruzen nodded sadly. "So when will you return to the village?" he asked, and she frowned. "I don't know, sensei. Maybe when the village has recovered enough from their hate and Naru-chan has grown up enough. If the villagers would still hold their hatred on him, then I don't know if I would really ever return if Naru-chan doesn't want to," she said, and he nodded, hoping that the villagers came around in time. "So I guess this is goodbye for now, sensei," she said, standing up, and he nodded himself, getting up and walking her to the door. Tsunade left and walked down the streets as she entered a convenience store and brought some supplies for the trip and went back on her way to the Senju back, avoiding the annoying gossiping villagers. Senju compounds. Tsunade walked in, seeing Shizune packing all the stuff up, and smiled for her help. She sat down on the cushion in the huge traditional Japanese living room as Shizune came in, finishing the packing, and smiled at her as she sat down in front of her. "So Tsunade-sama, did everything go alright?" she asked, pouring the both of them some tea, and Tsunade took the glass gratefully and sipped it, keeping it down on the table. "Yes, Shizune, everything went fine, and from today onwards our little Naru-chan is Naruto Senju to the world, and my son being the official clan heir to the Senju clan," she said happily, and Shizune smiled brightly. "So now I am a big sister and have a little brother to coddle," she chirped happily, and Tsunade smiled and nodded as Shizune took the little boy in her arms. "Now I am your big sister, Naru-chan. You like me, don't you? Isn't your big sister the best?" She asked, cooing, and he giggled, giving her a confirmation as she coddled him happily and played with him. Tsunade smiled, thinking how he had made the both of them so happy over the past 2 days. She saw that he was now warming up to Shizune too and was happy for it. Shizune, is everything done? Are we ready to leave? She asked, and Shizune nodded. Hi Tsunade-sama, everything is done and we can leave anytime we want. She said, and Tsunade nodded as she took Naruto from her arms and both started sealing the things into storage scrolls, and Naruto giggled every time they sealed something at the poofing sound it made, and the both of them laughed as they saw him get upset when everything was sealed. Tsunade glomped him as he puffed his cheeks slightly and rubbed her cheek against his, making him giggle. Both of them picked up the scrolls and walked out of the compounds, going towards the gates. At the village gates, Tsunade came up to the gates, seeing some people standing there. Hiruzen, Kakashi, Jiraiya, and the three elders too were there with them. She frowned, thinking about what they could be wanting with her, and walked towards them. Koharu and Homura came forward and gave her a warm smile, and Tsunade just gave a small nod of acknowledgement without so much as a slight smile. They noticed this and grimaced at her cold greeting, and she looked at their faces of disgust that they had for a moment as they gazed at Naruto, and she held the sleeping child tightly to her chest, which they noticed and frowned. Tsunade-chan, why are you retiring and leaving the village? You have free Sannin travel rights and we haven't forced you into anything all these years, so why are you doing this? We can always get you reinstated and forget about all this. You don't have to leave, said Koharu with her grandmotherly smile as Tsunade spoke up. No, I don't want to be tied down to this village any longer, and Naru-chan needs my full attention. I don't want you recalling me for any reason by force, and I have served this village quite enough already. I have fought in 2 of the last wars and have lost enough. It's time I left the shinobi forces and lived for myself. She said, and Homura spoke up. But Tsunade-chan, this is the village your ancestors built. The village needs the strength of a Sannin and the last Senju in the village at this time. You shouldn't leave, and that too just because of that thing. He said, venomously whispering the last part as Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the old coot. You better hold your tongue, you old goat. That thing, as you called it, is my son and the heir to the Senju clan and the son of Minato Namikaze. She said coldly, and Homura flinched and glared back as Danzo spoke up. You should stay, Tsunade. What would your grandfather and granduncle think of you leaving the village behind? He asked in his stoic voice, trying to guilt-trip her, and she glared at the old war hawk. They would be ashamed of what this village has become, especially what some of their students have fallen to. She said as Danzo frowned, understanding her insinuation. He thought it to be a waste that the last Senju and a Sannin was leaving, and that too for a useless Jinchuriki with no chakra. Maybe if he tried he could get the real Jinchuriki and make them good weapons for the village, he thought. All 3 backed down, seeing she was in no mood for any persuasion, and the other 3 stepped forward. Well, Tsunade, keep writing and keep in touch with your old sensei, alright? Said Hiruzen, and she nodded with a small smile. Take care of Naruto, Tsunade-sama. I can't think of a better person than you to care of him. Maybe you could come back with him sometime. Kakashi said nervously, and Tsunade smiled, seeing the usually laid-back copy ninja fiddling with words, and nodded. Don't worry, Kakashi, you'll see him and I'll take care of him. After all, he is my son, don't you worry about a thing. She said, and Kakashi nodded with an eye smile. Well, Tsunade-hime, don't you worry, I'll be seeing you soon. After all, I can't be too long gone without seeing my godson. And Minato did name him after my book's character. He said proudly, and she smiled. Yeah, the only book you wrote that was worth anything. She said, and Jiraiya looked offended. Hey, I'll have you know my books are a hit. Even Kakashi and Sensei have turned to my ways of exquisite literature, I'll let you know. He said, and she looked at the both of them incredulously, who were whistling innocently, looking away, and Jiraiya continued. And after all, maybe you could show me a thing or two for my research. He said, giggling perversely, and a moment later he was embedded in the village wall, crying anime tears as the other 2 sweat dropped. They all said their goodbyes, and Tsunade walked out towards the old Senju hidden compounds with Shizune and little Naruto in her arms with a smile. The old hidden Senju compounds were back to life, as this time they were being used for living peacefully instead of the hideouts that they were previously used as. The huge compound fields were flowing with greenery that was grown by Hashirama Senju himself, along with the stream flowing through the middle of the grounds that was raised from an underground water source, the living and ongoing proof of Tobarama Senju's mastery over the water element. The old house standing there to the side of the compound was a traditional two-story Japanese house that held the elegance that all the great clan compounds like the Hyuga held, and sitting on the porch of the house looking at a small blonde boy was Tsunade. She smiled as she watched the boy coddle up Katsuyu in his arms and giggling happily as he chased her around, crawling and giggling. She stood up, walking towards the little bundle of joy as she crouched down in front of him a few feet away, opening her arms as she urged for him to come to her. Naruto immediately forgot all about Katsuyu and started crawling happily to Tsunade, who stepped back a bit and he sat down confused, tilting his head to the side cutely as she resisted with all her heart to not glomp the boy to death. She opened her arms again and he smiled as he again started crawling to her, and she again stepped back a few steps giggling as Naruto sat down, puffing his cheeks, making him look all the more adorable in her eyes. Shizune sat to the side as she watched the mother-son duo playing. She saw Tsunade teasing the boy and laughed as she saw him puffing his cheeks at her teasing. She saw that he never cried no matter how much she teased him, and the most that Tsunade could get out of him was puffing of his cheeks. Tsunade opened her arms again and saw as Naruto put his hands to the ground and stood up with shaking legs as he took a step towards her, and her eyes widened. Shizune gasped as she got to her feet and her hands over her mouth as she saw Naruto take his first step. Tsunade's eyes watered as she saw him take his first step, and she saw him take another and saw he was watching her sadly and was confused but urged for him to come to her. "Come on Naru-chan, just a bit more. Come to Ka-chan," she said through a sob, and Naruto took 5 steps and stumbled as she grabbed her in his arms before he fell down and saw him gazing at her curiously. He put his little hand on her cheek and wiped the tear away, and her eyes widened as she understood why he looked sad after his first step and embraced him tightly to her chest. "Oh God Naru-chan, you walked so much just because I cried. Oh my boy, I love you so much," she whispered, and he snuggled in her arms, making her smile. She gazed into his eyes that always drew her to him as she kissed him on the nose as he scrunched his face a bit, and she giggled. "Oh, you're Ka-chan's adorable little fox now, aren't you Naru-chan, aren't you?" She cooed and kissed him as he giggled, and Shizune laughed as she too joined in tickling the little boy. Suddenly they heard a voice startling them. "Hey, it isn't fair for two ladies too," said Jiraiya as he jumped up and saw a hail of kunai and senbon concentrated on where his crotch was a moment ago and turned ghastly white as he finished the sentence. "Team up on my godson, hey, what's the big idea that could have been fatal to little Jiraiya?" He yelled indignantly as Shizune lowered her senbon launcher and Tsunade lowered her hands that were filled with senbon ready for another charge. "Well, you damn pervert, if you would come like a normal guest then maybe you would get a little safer welcome, and I would be glad if little Jiraiya disappeared, maybe then the girls can bathe freely," she said, and Naruto giggled, clapping as Tsunade smiled at Jiraiya knowingly, and he grumbled about disrespectful blondes, and Shizune laughed. "Even my own godson betrays me, what has the world come to?" he cried, anime tears, walking up to Tsunade as Naruto patted his head in reassurance, making him cry harder, and Tsunade and Shizune to hold their sides in laughter. "So what are you doing here, pervert?" asked Tsunade, and Jiraiya acted mock hurt, clutching his chest. "Oh, you hurt me, Haim, can't a godfather come and give his godson an early birthday present?" he asked, and pulled out a small wrapped bundle and handed it to her as she saw a cap with the toad looking like it would eat the one who wore it and some stuffed toys, most of them toads, and she glared at the man. "You aren't going to get him to sign the toad contract before me no matter how much you bait him," she said, glaring, and he whistled innocently. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Haim," he said in an all-too-innocent voice as Naruto clutched a stuffed toad to himself happily and Jiraiya did a victory dance. "See, Haim, he is already coming around to the ways of the great toad sage Jiraiya," he said, doing a strange dance on a big samurai toad who croaked with a sweat drop, feeling ashamed. Tsunade and Shizune stared at him blankly while Naruto clapped and giggled. Jiraiya picked up Naruto, rubbing his cheek with his own as he cried happily. "Oh my, someone who appreciates true talent," he said happily as Shizune took Naruto from him, and a moment later his head was bashed into the ground. "True talent, my, that was pathetic," she said, cracking her knuckles as Shizune and Naruto giggled as they saw Tsunade and Jiraiya arguing about who Naruto would summon in the future. "Let's go and have some hot chocolate," You like it, don't you, Naru-chan? Asked Shizune, and Naruto nodded happily as she walked in, leaving the two arguing adults. A few minutes later she saw them both come in as Tsunade had a victorious smirk on her face with Jiraiya and a lump on his head, grumbling about violent women winning arguments through demon strength. What did you say? Asked Tsunade sweetly as an image of the Shinigami appeared behind her, and Jiraiya gulped and waved his hands in front of him in defense. Nothing, Tsunade-hime, he said nervously, and Tsunade nodded and sat beside Naruto, who was drinking his hot chocolate in his small mug happily as she faked a hurt expression. Oh, Naru-chan doesn't even share his hot chocolate with Ka-chan, I'm hurt. She said as she faked some crying, and Naruto gazed at her with a sad expression, and she felt a tug on her kimono and saw Naruto handing her the mug and the toad he had gotten from Jiraiya with watering eyes as he sniffed, and she immediately scooped him up in her arms and tickled him, making him giggle. She embraced him as he snuggled into her arms and buried his face in the crook of her neck, making her smile. He really loves you, doesn't he, Hime? Said Jiraiya in a serious and genuinely happy tone, and Shizune nodded with a smile. Yes, Jiraiya-sama, Naruto never cries even if he is hurt. But when Tsunade-sama is sad or crying, he would immediately start sniffing and his eyes water as he hugs her. He can't see Tsunade-sama sad, it is the only thing that brings him even close to crying. Said Shizune, and he nodded as he watched Tsunade coo and tickle Naruto. Yes, he is my little Naru-chan and loves me the most, don't you, Naru-chan? She asked teasingly as she ran her fingers through his stomach, and he giggled, trying to cover himself up with the stuffed toad, but to no avail. Jiraiya smiled as he saw how great a mother Tsunade was. He hadn't even seen Kushina that close to the twins, and that was saying something since she always tried to be around them after her loss of Minato. So pervert, why aren't you in Konoha? I know Kushina is throwing a huge party for the twins, and with all the women there, it's strange that you would be here. Asked Tsunade as she helped Naruto drink his hot chocolate slowly and wiped his mouth gently with a small towel. Tsunade-hime, I don't have to go to parties for women, girls fall at the charm of manliness that the great. He saw all of them were staring at him blankly except Naruto, who watched him quite curiously, and it gave him confidence. Toad Sage Jiraiya, he said, summoning the samurai toad from earlier as Naruto clapped and giggled while Tsunade sighed. You shouldn't encourage him, Naru-chan. He is already bad enough. She said tiredly, and Jiraiya looked offended. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? He said indignantly as Naruto just giggled at the man who sat in a corner with a dark cloud over his head, muttering about not getting respect. Suddenly she heard a knock on the door and wondered who it was, since only a few people had the access to pass the barrier to the compounds. She opened the door and saw Kakashi standing there and waved at her lazily. Yo, he said, and she sweat dropped at his laid-back attitude. Kakashi, what are you doing here? I thought that with the Kyuubi festival in the village the Anbu would be needed a lot more there. She said as she ushered him in, and he answered lazily. Yes, well, Tsunade-sama, you see, I had a bit of extra time for the start of the mission, and I thought visiting him before I started the duty for the festival tomorrow and reporting a bit later would be nice. He said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly, and she giggled. Yeah, no one will really be surprised with you being late anyways. She said, and I smiled as they entered the living room, and he was surprised to see Jiraiya there. They saw that Shizune was trying to push Jiraiya off Naruto as he was trying to show him some book, and she frowned. What the hell is going on over here? Asked Tsunade, and Jiraiya immediately put the book back and smiled innocently as he slapped a hand over Shizune's mouth and laughed. Nothing at all, Hime, I was just playing with Naruto over here and Shizune wanted to join us. He said, laughing nervously as she frowned and nodded, knowing he was lying as he let go of Shizune, who was glaring at the man. Well, Tsunade-sama, I brought a little present for little Naruto over here. Said Kakashi with an eye smile as he handed her a package, and she unwrapped it to find some clothes that had dogs imprinted on it, and she glared at the Cyclops ninja and Jiraiya, and Shizune laughed wholeheartedly. I swear the whole world is trying to persuade my Naru-chan into being their summoner. She said with a sigh, and he sweat dropped. So this had already been tried, he mused and watched happily as Naruto took the clothes and gazed at them happily. I smiled and sat the blonde on his lap as he played with him a little when Naruto suddenly pulled down the mask he wore, and everybody's heart stopped as they saw Naruto do the impossible and immediately got in front of the two to look at his face. They saw what he had under his mask was another mask. And they all face-faulted as I smiled and Naruto giggled at seeing all of them pulling their hair at being outdone by him. A moment later Naruto yawned as he opened his arms to Tsunade motioning for her to pick him and she smiled as she picked him up and he snuggled in her arms making them all smile. Tsunade felt the familiar tug on her kimono and saw Naruto looking at her innocently and knew what he wanted. So little Naru-chan is hungry isn't he? Asked Tsunade as he smiled and she took him to her room with her as Shizune served tea to the two men who took it gratefully and Jiraiya asked just before they were all going to sip it. So why did Tsunade take her inside her room? Wouldn't his food, be here? He asked bringing the cup to his mouth as Shizune answered calmly. Oh no, Naru-chan has to feed so she took him inside to feed him herself. She said as both the men spit out their tea and violently coughed at the revelation. She's what? But how is that even possible? Asked Jiraiya with eyes as wide as saucers and Kakashi too had a stunned expression on his face. Shizune smiled at seeing their shocks and answered. Tsunade-sama created a medical ninjutsu for nurses to feed young children who didn't have mothers at the hospital but it wasn't ever implemented. But it gave her the perfect chance to feed Naruto with what a newborn child needs the most. She said and they both nodded dumbly thinking of the level that Tsunade had reached to create so many great medical techniques. Well, that kid has all the luck in the world, to think he is doing the thing that almost every man in the elemental nations has dreamt of doing, grumbled Jiraiya and Kakashi nodded sagely while Shizune sighed shaking her head. A moment later Jiraiya started giggling perversely and got up and started walking as Shizune spoke up. I hope you aren't going to peek on them Jiraiya-sama. I think you remember the incident 4 years ago and to think what she would do if she caught you peeking at her while she is feeding Naruto. She trailed off as Jiraiya stopped dead in his tracks and Kakashi gulped both imagining what she would do and started laughing nervously. Well, you have gotten the wrong Shizune, I was just going to the bathroom. He said laughing nervously and sat back down sipping his tea as Shizune smiled and sipped her own cup as they sat in silence as a few moments later Tsunade came with a sleeping Naruto snuggled in her arms and she sat down on the table smiling as she rubbed his whiskers making him purr and snuggle into her more. So Tsunade-hime, Sarutobi-sensei sent this for Naruto's present. Said Jiraiya handing her a scroll as she took the scroll with a raised eyebrow and unsealed it as she saw a reverse summoning seal and threw it on the ground. A poof of smoke later there stood Monkey King Enma as he looked at all of them and then grinned at seeing the little sleeping blonde in Tsunade's arms. So this is the boy Sarutobi told me about. Well, he certainly is Minato's son and will be a really strong shinobi in the future. I can see the potential just by his chakra signature alone. He said and Tsunade twitched as the temperature of the room dropped a couple of degrees and she handed Naruto to Shizune as she stood up and cracked her knuckles making the three of them gulp. A few moments later Shizune gently cupped the ears of the sleeping child as the three men screamed in pain as Tsunade started beating them all and threw them outside the house. Don't try to force my little baby boy into your stupid summoning contracts. He is only 1 year old for God's sakes. She shouted as she slammed the door and the three stood up cracking their sore bones as Enma turned to the two of them. What did I do wrong to get beaten like that and damned as she hit hard? He grumbled as the other two nodded and walked back to the village while Enma puffed into smoke and returned to the summoning realm. Konohagakure no Sato. They returned to the village to attend the grand party that was thrown in the honor of the Hiro Uzumaki twins. Kushina had arranged a huge party along with the support of the whole council as she waited for Kakashi and Jiraiya to arrive. Hiruzen was already there but they were the closest friends of Minato and she wanted them here. She saw them come into the party and walked up to them happily. Hey, where have you been? I've been waiting for you both all night. She said and they both smiled handing her the presents that she just kept aside and turned to them. They frowned at her lack of enthusiasm for their gifts as they remembered how Tsunade had given their presents to Naruto almost instantly and had respected them a lot. But they shrugged it off seeing she already had a lot of them seeing the people at the party. Well, you see Kushina, we went to Tsunade first to wish little Naruto there and it took us a little while to return though we tried our best to return on time. Said Jiraiya and Kakashi nodded with an eye smile and she frowned at hearing about the two and nodded. So how is Tsunade and Naruto? She asked and they noticed the little hesitation in her voice as she asked them about them. They are fine, but Tsunade just wanted to keep the whole affair simple, calling just those who were really close and just a small get-together with a dinner. But we left as we had to come here first, said Jiraiya, and Kakashi just glanced around, seeing so many important people around was a first for him. He mused, and that too just for a birthday party. So how is Naruto? She asked nervously, and the both of them looked at her, surprised at her blunt question, as Jiraiya answered with a smile. Maybe she still had some hope left after all. He is great. I haven't seen a happier child, and Tsunade treats him like a teddy bear all the time. I swear he is too close to his mother already, he said, and Kushina frowned and felt a pang of jealousy in her heart. Jiraiya knew this would egg her on, as he had seen her realize the mistake she had made a year back. Yes, the way he just relaxes in her arms is surprising, but I guess Tsunade-sama is a great mother. And Jiraiya-sama, is it true that he took his first steps yesterday? He asked, and Jiraiya smiled, remembering the scene that had been etched onto his memory, and saw Kushina's interested eyes, and his smile widened. Yes, I was there yesterday. Tsunade was teasing him yesterday by calling him to her arms and would step back and then call for him in her open arms again. After a couple of tries, he stood up and took his first step, and Tsunade started crying from happiness. Naruto, seeing this, was saddened and took more steps to her just to wipe her eyes, as it hurt him to see her cry, not knowing she was shedding tears of happiness. I am glad I took pictures of every moment yesterday. I'll gift it to her the next time I see her, he said, as Kakashi was amazed at the story, and Kushina's heart broke as she heard the story, and she imagined her baby boy coming to her arms like that. She broke off those thoughts and walked away, her mood ruined as she walked up to her daughters. Kakashi looked confused while Jiraiya smiled sadly. How long will you hide the pain in your heart, Kushina? You were the one who pushed your son away, and now he loves Tsunade more than any other child loves his mother, from what I've seen. Don't wait too much, or it might be a bit too late, he thought as he left the party, going towards the bar for some sake to remember his student that was reminded to him every time he saw his son. A moment later, Kakashi jumped beside him and he smiled at him knowingly. So you too, huh? He asked, and Kakashi nodded with an eye smile. Yes, he reminds too much of Sensei, doesn't he? He asked as Jiraiya smiled fondly, thinking of his godson. Indeed he does, he said, and both of them entered the bar to drown their sorrows away. Meanwhile, at the hidden Senju compounds, Tsunade and Shizune walked out of the kitchen with a freshly baked cake in their hands and saw Naruto there sitting with Katsuyu glomping her happily. Tsunade smiled at how much Katsuyu liked her little boy and was always happy to be summoned to just play with him. And Naruto loved her just as much, glomping her every chance he got. She put the cake on the table and crouched down on the carpet where the two were and smiled. Well, Naru-chan, let poor old Katsuyu go and let's cut your cake, alright? She said as Naruto let her go and she picked him up as she smiled at Katsuyu. I'm sorry, Katsuyu, for all the trouble he causes you, she said, and Katsuyu too slugged up along with her to the table. It is no problem at all, Tsunade-sama. I really like spending time with little Naruto-kun here, she said in her melodic voice, causing Shizune and Tsunade to smile. They cut the cake and popped the party poppers as Naruto giggled and played happily all night as the celebrations at the Senju compounds came to an end when Naruto fell asleep in Tsunade's arms from exhaustion. The little family celebration ended on a happy note as they all slept, the happiest they had been in a long time. Time skip 1 year later. It was just another usual day at the Senju compounds as Tsunade sat in the living room reading Naruto a picture book as he had his wide curious eyes fixed on the pictures as she read him the story. Tsunade thought about the last year while reading the book as her mind wandered off. Jiraiya and Kakashi had visited a couple more times in between the year, and Hiruzen too wanted to come over but was cooped up in work and had stuck to sending her letters only. Jiraiya's visit was a bit peculiar last time since he had talked to her about Kushina. That was a topic she didn't want to talk about, but seeing as he insisted, she heard him out. He had told her that Kushina was starting to realize her mistakes and her questions about how Naruto was doing and how his life was coming up or various other things were becoming more and more frequent. She had harshly told him not to take up that topic again, and he had obliged hesitantly, but a little fear sat down that day in the back of her mind that if she really did repent her mistake, then one day she might take her Naru-chan away from her. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts, when she felt Naruto rubbing her cheek softly and looking at her with those curious eyes, and she realized she had spaced out and stopped reading. Her eyes softened at seeing his innocent face and involuntarily her eyes watered at the thought of her losing her baby boy. Ka-chan, Naruto said in his little voice and her eyes widened as she wiped away her tears frantically. She instantly brought him close and kissed him on his cheek as she looked at him desperately. What did you just say, Naru-chan? Can you say it again please? She asked and he nodded. Ka-chan, he said again and she brought her son in a warm embrace as he snuggled into her taking in her warmth and kissed her cheek softly rubbing her tears away making her smile. Shizune came up and saw the tear stains on her face and was worried as she rushed to her. What's the matter Tsunade-sama? She asked and Tsunade beamed as she pointed to her son proudly. My little Naru-chan just said his first words, isn't that right Naru-chan? She asked and he grinned foxily making him look adorable to the ladies. Ka-chan, he chirped happily making Tsunade's heart flutter and Shizune brought her hands to her face in shock as she ran up to them. Naru-chan can you say Nei-chan please? She asked pleadingly making Tsunade giggle. Naruto just tilted his head to the side in confusion as Shizune picked him up and kissed him on the cheek. Ka-chan, he chirped happily again making Shizune groan and Tsunade to laugh as all her fears lay forgotten and she took him in her arms and he happily nuzzled into her. Well looks like he knows all the important words now doesn't he Naru-chan? She asked cooing as Naruto grinned and gave her a sloppy kiss on the cheek. Tsunade-sama that's not really nice, he'll say my name too just you see. Said Shizune puffing her cheeks and Tsunade laughed. Hello ladies how are you doing, I heard some commotion down here. Said a new voice that Tsunade knew all too well but she was too happy as her baby boy was cuddled in her arms and had given her the happiest moment of her life. His first words were for her which couldn't make her happier. You always come here at the right time you damn pervert, you really are lucky you know. She said and he looked at her curiously wondering what she was talking about. Naru-chan just said his first words a few moments ago, didn't you Naru-chan? She teased and he snuggled in her neck from embarrassment making her giggle. He was too shy around people other than her and Shizune and did this if she teased him in front of them. Really? Is that right? He asked not believing it when Naruto looked at him and smiled. Ka-chan. He chirped and Jiraiya's eyes widened as he too rushed to him and took him in his arms rubbing his cheek against his smiling proudly and crying anime tears. That's my godson. He said happily making the ladies smile but ruined it a moment later. Now say, make Papa proud. He said giggling perversely and a moment later Shizune took Naruto from his arms making him whine, as a beating ensued courtesy of a seething Tsunade. You damn pervert when will you ever learn? Don't you dare try and corrupt my baby boy. She roared as Jiraiya's screams were heard all over the Senju compounds. No not there. Not there. Ah, he screamed as Shizune shook her head while Naruto looked at her confused. You'll understand someday Naru-chan, she said with a smile taking him in and getting him to try and say Nei-chan. A few minutes later Tsunade came in smiling and dragging a half-dead Jiraiya with smoke coming out of him and put him on the floor as Naruto went near him and poked him with a bat making Shizune giggle. Tsunade-sama don't you think you went a bit overboard? Asked Shizune and Tsunade waved her off. Oh don't worry he has built up a resistance to beatings over the years and I didn't even go halfway through what I did to 7 years ago. She said as a moment later Jiraiya stood up looking fine as he dusted himself off. That's right the great toad sage Jiraiya can't be put down by the hands of such a fine lady. He said doing a strange dance making the girls sigh and Naruto giggle and clap. Only you understand my true talent my boy. He said crying and hugging him as the ladies shook their heads. I'll never know why Naru-chan likes that stupid dance so much. Said Shizune and Tsunade nodded but smiled a little. She was glad that Jiraiya was making so many efforts to bond with his godson as she saw him play with the new stuffed toads he brought and Naruto giggling as he made some strange faces making him laugh. She joined them in playing as Jiraiya suddenly stood up motioning for her to follow him and took her to the side and she followed seeing his serious expression. What's the matter Jiraiya? She asked and he smiled sadly as he handed her an album that she took with a confused expression. That is the photo album and journal of Minato. I brought it here from the Namikaze mansion after I asked you for a bit of Naruto's blood the last time I came here. He said and realization dawned on her face as to why he had asked for a bit of Naruto's blood. But why have you brought it here Jiraiya? She asked and he smiled at her confused expression. Tsunade Haim, Naruto's growing up and now he can speak too. He will grow as intelligent and powerful as his father was, of that I have no doubt. But he will start to ask you questions about his father sometime from now. With all the books you read to him, I have seen his confusion and sadness when he reads stuff about a child's father. When he asks, you will have something that belonged to his father to show him. He said, and she nodded and took the album and journal to the archives in the basement and kept them there and sealed the room again. The sound of laughing and running was heard all over the Senju compounds as Shizune stood cooking up the lunch in the kitchen and smiled at the joyful noise ringing in the compounds. It made her happy that Naruto made everything so lively here and was glad at the changes he had brought to her master. She no longer drowned in her sorrows and was actually now fully focused on raising Naruto and saw how wonderful of a mother she was. Naru-chan, come back here or else, she said, chasing the running blonde playfully with open arms, laughing a bit as she did so. He had an expensive bottle of sake and her cup in his hands as he ran. There's no way you'll catch me, Ka-chan. He chirped happily as he ran with her sake bottle in his hands and was laughing as he made her chase him all around the compound. He suddenly tripped as he fell face first and skid a bit as the bottle broke and Tsunade gasped. Naru-chan, she shouted as she ran towards him and picked him up in her arms as she saw the pieces of the bottle embedded in his palms and the blood that seeped through it. Naru-chan, how many times have I told you to be careful when you are running? She scolded a bit angrily as his eyes watered and he held his head down and a few tears dropped seeing her so angry. He tried to pick up the broken pieces to see if he could fix it and her eyes softened as he sobbed and picked up the pieces, collecting them in his bleeding hands. I'm sorry, he said timidly, thinking she was mad because he broke her bottle, and was startled as she scooped him up in her arms and held him close to her as she made him drop all the pieces he had in his hands and rubbed his back gently, and he cried in the crook of her neck, whispering apologies in sobs. She cooed the little boy and soothed him, telling him it was all right. I wasn't angry because you broke the bottle, Naru-chan, I was angry because you hurt yourself. I worry about you too much, so be careful from now on, all right? She asked softly, and he nodded as she kissed his tears away gently and took his hands in hers softly as her hands were enveloped in green medical chakra and she started pulling out the pieces and healing his hands. Naruto winced from the pain and she kissed his head as she kept healing him gently and held him close to her. Shish, it's alright, it won't even feel a little painful in a few moments, alright? She whispered gently, and his sobs stopped as she let go of his hands and he looked at them amazed that they were all fine already. Sugoi. Ka-chan, how did you do that? He asked with glimmering eyes as he watched her amazed, and she giggled as she scooped him up in her arms and he giggled as she twirled him around and held him close to her as he watched her curiously with wide cerulean eyes waiting for an answer. Well, Naru-chan, that was your Ka-chan's invention and a medical jutsu that helps me to heal most of the wounds like I just did with you. She said, and he tilted his head to the side, cutely getting him a kiss on the cheek, and he giggled. Ka-chan, what's a medical just jutsu? He asked, fumbling with the words, making her giggle as she walked into the living room and put him on her lap as she brushed his hair softly and put her chin on his head, making him snuggle into her, and she smiled as he looked up with those wide curious eyes that were always eager to learn new things. A jutsu is a thing shinobi used to perform amazing things. Your Ka-chan is a specialist in medical jutsu, techniques that are used to heal people who are hurt badly. Do you understand, Naru-chan? She asked softly and tried to explain it in the simplest way possible. She saw him with a thoughtful expression on his face and let him absorb it all in, and after a moment he nodded. How you help people who are hurt with that awesome cool glowy hands thingy? He said, nodding sagely, and she laughed at the way he explained such a complicated thing in his own cute words. She kissed his head and brushed his hair as she held him close to her. Hi Naru-chan, your Ka-chan can help people with the awesome cool glowy hands thingy. She said teasingly, and he looked down embarrassed. I'm not so smart, am I? He whispered, and she smiled and brought his face up as she put a finger under his chin and kissed his forehead softly and gave him a heartwarming smile. No, my Naru-chan is really smart, you are just a little small now to understand these things. For now, we'll let you learn to read and write, alright? She said softly, and he nodded happily. Are you strong, Ka-chan? He asked, and she thought for a moment how to answer it. Well, I can hold my own against most people, and there are only a few people that can stand up to your Ka-chan, including that pervert Jiraiya. He may not look it, but he's really strong. She said, and his eyes widened. Really, Jiraiya Oji-san is that strong? He asked, and she nodded with a smile, and he frowned. There is no way he is stronger than you. You always beat him when he comes to meet us. Ka-chan is the strongest. He said in a determined voice, and she giggled and nodded as suddenly there was a puff of smoke and the voice of wood clattering, and Tsunade sighed. From east to west and north to south, the women fall to my feet and succumb to my charms, the legendary Toad Sage of MT. Myoboku Jiraiya has arrived, said Jiraiya, doing his strange dance on his samurai toad as Naruto beamed and clapped. Pervy Sage, he said happily, and Jiraiya face faulted and Tsunade laughed wholeheartedly. Don't call me that, you damn brat, he said indignantly and huffed and crossed his arms as Tsunade and Naruto giggled at him. That's a great name, Naru-chan, call him that from now on, alright? She asked, and he nodded as Jiraiya's jaw dropped to the ground. Hey, my dear godson won't call me that now, will he? He asked hopefully as Naruto looked at him confused and tilted his head to the side cutely. Call you what, pervy sage? He asked innocently, and Tsunade snickered as he cursed under his breath and dispelled the toad. Shizune walked in and saw Jiraiya there and smiled as she served them some tea, and all of them sat at the table. So Jiraiya, any special reason you came, or is it just a regular visit? She asked, and he frowned as he made a short signal towards Naruto that she caught and gave him a curt nod. Naru-chan, can you go and play with Shizune for a while until me and Jiraiya talk? She asked, and he was saddened as he sat on her lap and wrapped his arms around her neck. Do I have to go? He asked softly, and she smiled and brushed his hair softly. He never liked it whenever she sent him away to talk to Jiraiya personally, but these things were just not for him. She brought his face in front of her, cupping it in her hands as she gave him a smile. Please, Naru-chan, we'll be done shortly. This is something for us adults and it would make you bored, so you go and play with Shizune and we'll be with you shortly, alright? She asked softly, and he nodded and kissed her on the cheek as Shizune took him by his hand to the clan grounds. Jiraiya smiled as he saw the interaction between the two and couldn't be happier. So what is it, Jiraiya? She asked, and he snapped his attention back to her and turned serious. Tsunade, I'll be straight, Kushina has asked me if you could maybe come back to the village so she could meet Naruto. He said bluntly, and Tsunade immediately stiffened and her face turned emotionless. And why would I want to do that? She asked coldly, and he flinched under her gaze and knew how protective she was of Naruto. Well, she has realized the mistakes she made in her grief and sorrow and is repenting what she did. She wants to meet her son. He was cut off as Tsunade interrupted him. My son, she added coldly, and he nodded as he continued. Yes, well, and she wanted to meet up with him and make up for all the lost time. He said, and she stared at him blankly, not giving away any emotions, and was silent for a few moments. And you honestly believe me to return to the village so that she could meet the boy who she threatened to kill as an infant? You believe I would risk Naru-chan's safety and let him see the villagers' glares just because she feels repentance? What will I do when Naru-chan asks me the reasons for what happened all those years ago? Will he be able to understand and stand the burden he holds? She asked in an icy tone, and he grimaced, knowing every point she made was right. But Tsunade, be reasonable, she is his moth. He gulped as she leaked her killing intent and continued. She wants to make amends and her guilt is genuine, and he will have to return and face the village someday. Even Sarutobi-sensei believes you should let him meet her. Don't worry, you will be escorted by Anbu and he won't even see the villagers, I guarantee you. He said in a desperate tone to persuade her to return, and she just stared at him icily. No, she said coldly, and cut him off before he could protest. I don't care whatever you or that old monkey thinks. I won't let Naru-chan near Kushina or that village until I see it fit, or if I ever see it fit. I don't care if she feels guilt or whatever the hell she feels. You all are selfish. No one thinks of what effect it might have on my little boy. You just want what is best for you. I'll keep my boy safe here until I think he is ready to learn the truths and will lay it out to him gently. She said with finality, leaving no room for arguments. But that is his home. He belongs in the village. He pleaded, and she glared at him. He belongs here in my arms and safety. He will return to the village if he ever wants to, and if he doesn't want to do something, then Cammy herself will have to first go through my punches before touching my boy. She said, and he knew she wouldn't change her mind. And I know this isn't the only reason why you said this, is it, Jiraiya? She asked, and he grimaced at being caught. Well, Tsunade Heim, the village is requesting you back after it leaked out that you have left the shinobi forces and adopted Naruto. The villagers, after knowing that you are living happily with him after all these years, are willing to accept him, and the council too along with the elders are willing to accept him back with open arms. He said, and she took it all in silently, and Jiraiya continued, knowing this was his chance. And Tsunade, the village needs you back. They are willing to implement the medical plans you laid down and want the Senju clan to represent. He was cut off as Tsunade spoke up. That's it. You don't want me or Naru-chan back, you want what we represent. You want the Senju clan head and its heir back. You want to show that the village still stands strong with me in it. She said, and he opened his mouth, but she cut him off. And let me guess, the council found out that Minato left all of his knowledge to his son, and they want the feared Namikaze heir back with them. I know the Uzumaki twins haven't inherited any of their father's genes and are Uzumakis in every sense of the word, and now that they realize what they have lost in Naru-chan, they want him back. The council doesn't want the Senju fortune to be lost from the village, while the villagers will do anything to keep the founder clan of Konoha in the village. She said, and he looked down ashamed as she kept every point in front of him correctly. He always knew that she was good at political matters, and this proved it. Naru-chan and I will return if and only if we want to return. I won't force him into anything he doesn't want to do. I'll train him a bit so that he could have enough skills to protect himself, but if he doesn't want to be a shinobi, then so be it. She said, and his eyes widened as he started to speak, but she stood up. Leave, Jiraiya, and this is the last time I'll let it slide, since I know the council forced you and Sarutobi-sensei into this. But if you ever come with this sort of a thing to me again, then I'll cut all ties with you. She said icily and left the room, leaving an ashamed Jiraiya behind. He clenched his fists and cursed those damn elders and the council that put him up to this and ruined the already volatile image that Tsunade held for him after his hesitation at adopting Naruto. He stood up and left towards Konoha to report this to the council, and suddenly smiled. He would be smiling smugly when he smashed Tsunade's answer in their faces. Tsunade walked out and let her emotionless mask drop as she sighed tiredly, feeling drained, and walked through the hallways towards the living room and took out a bottle of water and drank it, crushing it in her hands from the anger she felt and let her killing intent loose at those damn elders. She knew those bastards were the ones behind all of this. She felt a tug on her kimono and looked down to see a whimpering Naruto clutching to her leg, and let her killing intent disappear as she picked him up and cradled the sniffing boy in her arms. She berated herself for letting loose her emotions and scaring him, and rubbed his back gently, calming him down. Ka-chan, are you angry? He asked softly, and she smiled and kissed the top of his head as she sat on the porch of the house with him cuddled up on her lap. No, Naru-chan, I was angry, but you took it all away. You always give your Ka-chan a lot of strength, you know that? She asked, and he looked at her with wide, curious eyes and smiled happily. Really? He asked, and she smiled and nodded as he wrapped his arms around her neck and gave her a kiss on her cheek and snuggled into her neck, and she smiled as she wrapped him up in her arms. She would never let anyone do anything to him as long as she had her eyes on him, she promised, and would save his innocence for as long as she could. So Naru-chan, let's begin your writing practice now, all right? She asked, and he nodded as she picked him up and walked into the traditional Japanese living room and sat on the cushion, pulling out the calligraphy kit that her grandmother used to use, and rubbed the stone on the calligraphy set's ink equipment to create some fresh ink. All right, Naru-chan, I explained this to you last time, right? Now show me how to properly rub this stone to create ink. She said to the boy on her lap, who nodded and picked up the stone and started rubbing it carefully the way she showed him, and she smiled. That's very good, now let's start your calligraphy practice then. She said, and he nodded as he picked up the brush and put his tongue out and had a frown of concentration on his face, with his tongue sticking out a bit as he drew the same kanji carefully that she drew. She was starting him with the writing skills and combining it with the calligraphy art, just as her grandmother did when she was younger. She saw his strokes were a lot sloppy, but there was improvement. They went it for a couple of hours before Naruto started getting tired and rubbed his eyes as they showed he was tired, and she pulled him back, pressing her closer to him and wrapped him up in her arms. So is Naru-chan tired? She asked softly as she put her cheek against his after kissing it, and he nodded, making her smile. Well, you did very well today, Naru-chan, and I am proud of you. She said, and he grinned foxily and turned around in her arms and snuggled into her embrace as he yawned and put his head on her shoulder, and she held him close to her, rubbing his back softly as his eyes drooped from exhaustion. A few minutes later he fell asleep and she picked him up and went to her room, tucking him in her bed and kissed his forehead and went out. She was surprised at the rate he was improving and knew he was taking after his Uzumaki heritage in the calligraphy arts and may even want to pursue sealing one day. She walked out and saw Shizune coming in with bags in her hands and smiled. She wondered where she was all this time, and now she knew she was out shopping. How did the writing practice go, Tsunade-sama? She asked as they walked into the kitchen, and she smiled. He is improving at a really good rate. My grandmother's trick still comes in handy, you know, even after all these years. He's learning how to write and getting calligraphy practice at the same time. Mito Bachan used to do this with me to help as I ever decided to pursue sealing, but it was never my field of expertise. I have some skill in it, but not that much, she said, and Shizune looked at her surprised. I didn't know you knew Fuinjutsu, Tsunade-sama, she said, surprised, and Tsunade nodded. Well, having the Uzumaki clan heiress as your grandmother certainly has its perks, she said, and Shizune nodded. Both of them had dinner and finished it as Tsunade stood up and was helping Shizune with the dishes when she felt a tug on her kimono and looked down to see Naruto rubbing his eyes and looking at her sleepily. She picked him up as he yawned cutely and snuggled up in her arms. What's the matter, Naru-chan? She asked, and he snuggled more, and she heard him sniffing and was worried as she felt him sobbing a bit. Did you have a nightmare? She asked softly, and he nodded a little as she rubbed his back and calmed him down. There was a big fox with so many tails and he was running and destroying everything, Ka-chan, he said softly, and she stiffened as she held him tighter to herself. She glanced at Shizune, who wasn't paying attention to her, and walked into her room and sat on the bed with Naruto in her arms. A big fox, you say? Did he say something to you? She asked softly, and he nodded. Yes, he said that he'll make me see the truth, but I don't know what he meant, and then he laughed and I was so scared, he said, trembling, and she cradled him close to her, cooing him. Shish, Naru-chan, there is nothing to worry about, I am here for you, she said softly, and he fell asleep crying as she put him to bed and lifted his shirt up softly, gazing at his stomach. She saw that the seal was perfectly fine and sighed in relief. She had read Minato's notes on the seal and knew there was no way that the fox will be able to make contact with him unless he accessed his mindscape. It was just the process of the seal strengthening itself over time that must have let some memories of the fox seep through. That meant that Naruto's chakra coils were now beginning to develop, and she smiled. She laid down beside him and he cuddled up against her with a small smile as she wrapped him up in her arms. Meanwhile, in Konohagakure no Sato, Hokage Tower, Hokage office, Jiraiya entered the office through the window and saw Hiruzen there sitting and puffing his pipe, and the three esteemed elders waiting for him, and made himself known with a small cough as Hiruzen smiled at his student. Ah, Jiraiya, I was waiting for you, so how did it go? He asked, and noticed Jiraiya's flinch and sighed. She burned me off, sensei. Didn't even listen to one reason and deducted everything from the elders and council's plan to Kushina's plea to meet Naruto. She said that if Naruto didn't want to become a shinobi or return to the village, then she wouldn't let anyone force him into anything. And this is the last time I have done this for you. She has threatened me that another attempt and she would cut off all ties with me. He spat the last sentence venomously at the three Coots, who flinched and looked down. This is bad, Hiruzen. The Senju clan belongs in the village. Do something, said Danzo, and Hiruzen stared at him blankly. And pray tell, what do you want me to do? She isn't a part of the shinobi forces anymore and is an honored retired Sannin. She is the clan head of the Senju, the most powerful clan of the Hidden Leaf. If she wants, then she could go to the daimyo himself and he would definitely help her with the amount of prestige the Senju clan still holds. You all should have thought of that before ostracizing and glaring at her son, he said icily, and the three flinched as Kaharu protested. But the child is the Namikaze clan heir along with the Senju, he belongs in the village. He needs to form bonds in the village, and the whole village is now willing to accept him, seeing as he is living peacefully with the slug princess herself, and see that he couldn't be the demon and want the both of them back, she said, and the other two nodded while Hiruzen shook his head. He still didn't understand how they got sniff of Minato's knowledge being passed on to Naruto, but he was regretting the leak now. There is nothing I could do now, the matter is out of my hands. This is the last time I have listened to the suggestion of the council on this matter. He will return with Tsunade if and when he wants to. Your forcing is only making matters worse, he said as Homura and Kaharu started to protest, but he put his hand up silencing them. I've heard and said enough, this matter is closed, you've heard her decision, now leave. He said, and they glared and stood up walking out. Danzo was seething on the inside. That damn monkey had let too much freedom to be enjoyed by Tsunade, and now he didn't have the chance to manipulate the boy to his way and use his influence and power to his gain. The boy held the knowledge of his father along with the influence of the Senju and would have been a useful pawn to him after he failed to get his hands on the twin Uzumaki sisters. He had tried to get the children to be trained by him, but Sarutobi had ruined it by saying that Kushina, being a former Jinchuriki, was a better teacher than he ever could be. He plotted other ways to get some power and walked into his deep underground lair. A moment later, Jiraiya turned to Hiruzen and glared at the man. You knew this would happen, didn't you? He asked, and Hiruzen smirked and nodded. Of course I did. I have led the village through 2 wars and am called the professor for a reason. I know this game of politics better than those 3 could ever play. I knew Tsunade would slap a no on your face and rub it in their faces. They have gained too much power on the council, and this will remind them of their place. I'll strip them of their newfound influence slowly and re-establish the village with the will of fire that it has always held. I am proud that Tsunade sniffed each of their ploys as I expected her to. He said, and Jiraiya smiled slightly at his sensei. So that was his plan. He wanted to build the same amount of power he held before he retook the position to call Tsunade back in a safe village. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and both looked at each other, perplexed that who could it be at such a late hour in the night. Come in, said Hiruzen, and in walked Kushina with a smile, and their smiles dropped, and Jiraiya groaned inwardly seeing her happy face that was about to be destroyed. Jiraiya, I am glad I found you here. I came to ask Hiruzen about Utt Ebane. She said happily, and he smiled sadly at her enthusiasm. So when is Tsunade-chan bringing back Naru-chan? She chirped happily, and both the men averted their eyes and her smile dropped at seeing their reactions. What's wrong? She asked, and Jiraiya took a deep breath and spoke up. Kushina, things aren't the way you are imagining them to be. He said sadly, and she frowned a bit confused. What do you mean? She asked, not understanding the problem, and he sighed. Well, Kushina, Tsunade has refused to return to the village or let you meet Naruto until she believes the time is right. He said, and Kushina's eyes widened in shock. What, but I am his moth, she was interrupted as Hiruzen interjected. Was his mother? He said icily, and her eyes watered. That was a mistake. I was drowned in sorrow and grief, and I took it all out on Naru-chan. But I am willing to make amends now. She said, and both men shook their heads. It isn't that easy now, Kushina. You evicted Naruto and Tsunade adopted him. She isn't some ordinary civilian that we could push around for you. She is the head of the Senju clan, and Naruto is the current heir of her clan now. He is under her protection, and we couldn't touch a hair on him without her permission, or the whole fire capital will be rumbled. There is a reason the Senjus are so respected in the land of fire, said Hiruzen. She glared furiously at the man. She is trying to use her influence to keep me away from him. I am the clan head of the Uzumaki clan head too, you know. She knows that Naruto will come to me and is purposely trying to keep me away from him. She said, and Hiruzen sighed, knowing her stubbornness, but she needed to face the facts. And she has every right to do so. He is her son whether you want to admit it or not, and she loves him blindly at that. I cannot do anything in the matter since she doesn't belong to the shinobi forces and isn't under my command, neither does she come under the civilian council seeing her prestigious clan status. We cannot interfere in clan affairs anyways, and as for you being the Uzumaki clan head and challenge her, you could do so, but I am pretty sure we both know who the feudal lord will side against. He said calmly, and a tear rolled down her eye. Kushina, just wait. That is all you can do. Give her time and let her see that Naruto needs to meet you and she will do it. She doesn't hold any hatred for you personally, but she is really protective of Naruto and is afraid to hurt him. At least you have come to realize your mistakes and want to repent. You'll get your chance, don't worry. He said calmly in an attempt to calm her down. But I want to meet him. His childhood is slipping away from my fingers. What would Minato say that I abandoned our only son because of my stupidity? How will I face him, Jiraiya? I hate myself for abandoning my own son to hide from my pain, and now I can't even meet him, she said as she cried in her hands, and he hugged her with one arm and consoled the crying woman. Hiruzen smiled sadly, knowing the decision lied with Tsunade. He also wanted her to come back and have Naruto live here, but knew this wasn't the time for her or Naruto to return, and they could only wait and watch what the future held in store for them. Tsunade sat on the porch of the riverside in the compounds as she heard the splashing of water and the giggling by her little blonde bundle. Come on Kichi, let's go and beat Pervy Sage. Come on Pervy Sage, let's see who reaches the shore near Ka-chan first, shouted Naruto as he sat on a toad that was as tall as Tsunade's shoulders. She smiled as she saw the cheerful bundle of joy riding the orange toad happily. Whatever you say, Naruto, we ain't gonna be beaten by the likes of that pervert, said Gamakichi as Tsunade and Shizune giggled. Hey, show me some respect, you damn brats. I'll show you both. Let's go Gama, we'll beat these brats and show them what the legendary toad sage Jiraiya can do, he said indignantly, and Gama, his personal samurai toad, croaked in agreement as they both rode their rides and rushed from their sides of the shore towards Tsunade. Both raced at full speeds as Naruto laughed happily. Let's go Kichi. Don't you dare slow down, he said as his blonde hair flowed in the wind with the water splashing his face as both of them raced to the shores. Both were nearly at the same speed and were converging on the shore at full speed. Jiraiya made Gama slow down at the last moment for a safe stop, but Naruto urged Gamakichi to go on as they reached the shore, and Gamakichi stopped abruptly as Naruto flew forwards laughing. Ka-chan, he shouted happily as Tsunade stood up and caught the flying little boy in her arms and twirled him around, making her kimono a bit wet as he giggled along with Tsunade. I won. See, I told you, Pervy Sage, he said laughing as Tsunade held him in her arms and Jiraiya glared at the little blonde. Hey, you cheated, I don't have Tsunade to catch me if I stop that abruptly. The last time I tried your trick she punched me in the face, he shouted as Naruto laughed and gave him a victory sign. That's too bad, Pervy Sage, because I have an awesome Ka-chan and shinobi always use everything they can, and Ka-chan is my secret weapon, he said proudly, and Tsunade giggled at the enthusiastic blonde in her arms and kissed his cheek. Well, you always have to do something so reckless, don't you, Naru-chan? She asked, and he grinned foxily, making Tsunade's mock anger melt away. I knew you'd catch me, Ka-chan, that's why Pervy Sage will never beat me, he said, and she smiled as she put him down, and he high-fived Gamakichi as both laughed at Jiraiya, who was grumbling about over smart blondes that were too smart for their own good. Yo Naruto, where's my candy? We won after all. Now time to pay up, he said, and Naruto smiled and pulled out some snacks from his pocket and handed them to the happy toad, who saluted him and puffed out in smoke. Suddenly Tsunade wrapped his head up in a towel and ruffled his head to dry him off. Alright, let's go inside and get you changed, it's time to study a bit. You had your fun with Jiraiya, now come on, let's go, she said, picking him up, and he snuggled in her arms as Jiraiya and Shizune followed the two blondes back into the house. Naruto changed off his clothes and came into the traditional room that they used for his calligraphy practice, and Tsunade put him on her lap and he picked up the brush and started drawing the kanji. Jiraiya sat there amazed at the skill the blonde was showing with the elegance he had in his strokes. Granted, they weren't perfect, but the skill was noticeable, and that too from such a small child was astonishing. Jiraiya sat there for an hour, occasionally eating the snacks that Shizune brought him, and watched the little blonde go at calligraphy. As the hour finished, Tsunade let the boy run off to get something to eat as she poured herself some tea and turned to Jiraiya. Wow, his skill in calligraphy is amazing for his age. How long have you been teaching him? He asked, and she smiled proudly for her son. Well, he has been at it for 2 years. I started teaching him how to write and coupled it with the calligraphy arts. He is better at writing with a brush than he is with a pen, she said with a giggle, and Jiraiya saw the ingenious way of starting a child at the art of calligraphy and smiled. Wow, that's ingenious, that saved you so much time if he decides to learn fuinjutsu, he said, and she nodded with a smile. So when are you going to start training him? Kushina started training her daughter a couple of months ago, and most of the clan children start at this age too, he said, and she smiled and nodded. Yes, tomorrow after his birthday is celebrated, I'll tell him about the start of his training, He has been pestering me for the past month and I have been telling him to wait. I wanted to keep it as a surprise for his birthday. She said, and Jiraiya nodded, smiling. He wanted to see who his godson was more like. From what he had observed with the Uzumaki twins, they were completely like Kushina, headstrong and learning more by doing it. But it was their tempers that were the cause of their break in the flow of training. She had been training them from the past couple of months, and when he had visited her a couple of weeks ago, they were still having trouble unlocking their chakras due to their hyperactive natures and lack of patience at the amount of concentration it took, and he had helped her for a couple of days and had finally gotten them to unlock their chakra. Kushina hadn't started them on any of the basics of calligraphy yet and was starting with her basics of taijutsu with them first. So what styles of taijutsu are you going to teach him? He asked, and she thought about it for a moment and then answered. Well, Minato left him his own personal style, and the Senju style of taijutsu that I use will be really effective if he has enough strength. Since his body is so fragile for now, but he is pretty quick and agile, I'll start him on Minato's style first, then when he is ready I'll start him in my clan's style. She said, and he nodded. Both were quite fearsome styles and he had seen both of them in action firsthand. While the Senju style of taijutsu was all about strength and was a lot more defensive with a few powerful blows to completely decapitate the opponent, Minato's own style, the hummingbird style of taijutsu, was all about speed, agility and precision. It was fearsome since it depended on the body's speed and agility and quick and precise blows, and was completely offensive as opposed to the Senju style. If the boy learned both of them, then he would be almost unbeatable at hand-to-hand combat. But to learn both, his body had to be trained to the ground, but still it would take him a lot of time. But if Tsunade was sure, then he would trust her. Well, that is a wise choice, Tsunade. Both are fearsome styles in their own regards, but the body conditioning needed to be that quick for the hummingbird and that strong for the Senju style would be too hard. Are you sure he'll be able to do it? He asked, and she just smiled and waved her hand, dismissing his doubts. I've thought about that already, don't you worry. She said, and he was confused with her answer but nonetheless nodded. So does he have any particular preferences of fields that he wants to pursue? He asked, and she smiled, sipping her tea, and nodded. Yes, he is interested in medical ninjutsu a lot, and I guess he will pursue sealing too. He is always asking me to teach him the awesome cool glowy hand thingy that heals people after all. She said with a giggle, and Jiraiya laughed wholeheartedly. Well, he adores you too much. It is no surprise he wants to take after your field of specialization. He said, and she nodded, smiling fondly, thinking of her son as Jiraiya put a scroll in front of her and she took it and looked at him questionably. That's from Kushina. She has invited you to the birthday party tomorrow at the Uzumaki clan compounds. Almost all the clan heads and their families are going, and she told me to give you this too. He said, and she nodded and put it aside and sipped her tea, closing her eyes. So will you go? He asked, a bit hopeful, seeing her neutral response, and she put her cup down as she gazed into his eyes. No, she said simply, and he sighed. He should have known, and he didn't even bother to try her to go, knowing she would just throw him out and ban him from coming in. So have you told him something about Minato yet? He asked, and she shook her head in negative, and he frowned. Tsunade, you should be telling him about his father, you know. He said, and she gave him an icy glare, making him gulp. Don't tell me what to do and what not to do to my Naru-chan. I'll tell him when he's ready, or if he asks first. I am not hiding anything from him, I am just waiting for the right time. She said coldly, and he nodded, seeing her tone of finality that left no room for arguments. Next morning, Tsunade woke up as she saw her little birthday boy cuddled up against her and smiled. She softly pulled his shirt up and ran her fingers on his stomach, smiling mischievously. Ha 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 ha. Ka-chan, stop, it tickles. He said through tears as he laughed, and Tsunade giggled as she let him go and hugged him warmly. Happy birthday, Naru-chan, she whispered softly, and he buried his face in the crook of her neck and kissed her softly, making her smile. Arigato, Ka-chan, I love you. He said softly, and she smiled as she ran her fingers through his hair. I love you too, Naru-chan. Now my little boy is growing up too fast, 5 already. She teased, and he buried himself in her embrace from the embarrassment, and she giggled. All right, now up you go, it's time to have some breakfast. She said, and he smiled and nodded as she picked him up and walked into the kitchen as she saw a smiling Shizune coming in. Happy birthday, Naru-chan. she said, taking him in her arms and kissed his cheek as he beamed happily. Arigato Nei-chan, he said, hugging her warmly, and she took him to the kitchen and sat him on his chair as both Shizune and Tsunade went to work on the special breakfast for him. She started on the rice and put on the soup as she fried some pork cutlets and poured the soup in a bowl over the rice and served the steaming hot freshly fried pork cutlets on top and added a bit of mayonnaise on top. She would never understand his peculiar combination making skills, but she had to admit it tasted pretty damn good. She brought the tray with the 3 large bowls and put them on the table as Naruto beamed and hugged her, making her giggle at how much he loved his food. All of them broke their chopsticks, and after a chorus of "Itadakimasu," they dug in and ate silently. She saw as he quickly tore through the food and giggled as she suddenly grabbed his bowl and pulled him onto her lap and grabbed his hands, putting her chin on his head. "Naru-chan, eat slowly like I told you, alright?" she said softly, and he nodded as he started eating elegantly, and she smiled as he put a bite for her and then took his own. Shizune too did the same with him, and Tsunade did the same for Shizune as they all laughed happily. They finished their food and Tsunade picked Naruto up and went towards the riverside porch as she sat down with him on her lap and her front pressed against his back as both put their feet slightly in the water and Naruto hummed a tune happily, making her smile. "Naru-chan, do you want to do something special today?" she asked, and he shook his head with a smile and spoke. "No, Ka-chan, I just want to spend the day with you and Nei-chan," he said happily, and she smiled and nodded. He kept humming and both watched as the fish came towards their feet and tickled their feet, making them giggle. After some time, Naruto suddenly stopped humming and started fiddling a bit, making Tsunade confused as she brought him in closer to her. "What's the matter, Naru-chan?" she asked, and he sat silent for a moment before he turned around in her lap and faced her. "Ka-chan, can I ask you something?" he asked, and she nodded with a smile. "Of course, my little angel, you can ask me anything," she said softly, and he smiled and nodded and fiddled a bit and spoke up. "Can you tell me about Tsunade?" he asked timidly, and she was shocked at first but then smiled and nodded. She was going to tell him tonight anyways, so this was all the better. She pulled out a storage scroll from the sleeve of her kimono and unsealed the album that Jiraiya had brought her, silently thanking the pervert as she turned him around with his back pressed against her front and brought her arms around him, opening it to the first page as she saw him in his Hokage robes, and Naruto gazed very curiously as she saw a few drops fall on her hands and saw his body shaking a bit as he ran his fingers on the picture. "This was Tsunade. He looks just like me," he whispered in sobs, and she smiled and nodded as she held him closely as her little boy cried, and she cooed him and calmed him down. "Ka-chan, can you tell me something about him?" he asked softly, and she nodded as she put her chin on his head and flipped a page to his academy picture. "Your Tsunade was a very smart and intelligent man just like you, Naru-chan. He always excelled at everything and was called a genius in the village and at his time in the academy. He was really kind and caring too, but he held an air of authority that made everyone follow him to wherever he said. He was born with those eyes of a leader, just like your eyes, that showed off everything he felt. He was born in a time of war and didn't have any parents, but he didn't let that stop him. He created his own jutsus and was a once-in-a-generation genius at the art. He fought bravely in the war, and his greatest battle was at the Canopy Bridge. His team was almost gone and all of them were injured. If the bridge was lost, then the village would have lost the war. So instead of retreating with the squad and running back to the village, your Tsunade stood up against 1,000 ninja all alone and used his signature jutsu and beat them all. He won the war all on his own, and people were so scared of his power that they were said to run away if they even saw him anywhere. He was called the Yellow Flash because he was so fast and so good with his signature jutsu that all people saw was a flash and it was all over," she said as she flipped through the album during his younger days as a ninja and his days in the war. She was glad that it was only his ninja photo album and none of them had Kushina in it, so she didn't have to answer any of those questions yet. Naruto sat transfixed, hearing her every word and burning it all up in his memory as he gazed at the album, starstruck. "Then what happened, Ka-chan?" he asked, and she smiled as she sipped some water from the bottle and continued her story. "Well, when he came back from the war, he was considered a hero in the village, and after a few years his name was so feared and respected in the world that the village named him Hokage. The youngest ever at 24 years old," she said as he asked a question. "Ka-chan, what is a Hokage?" He asked curiously, and she smiled sadly, as this was the question she had once heard Naoki ask her granduncle and remembered his speech that he spoke almost word for word. The Hokage is the leader of the village hidden in the